Thinking, here we go. Mary T. O'Sullivan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the Career Success Tips Live show. It is fantastic to have you on, and thank you so much for coming. I usually like to start out with what's something, obviously, COVID's happening, the workforce is changing. You have a vast amount of experience, particularly coaching executives. What's one thing that you think recent grads or emerging professionals might not know about that would be helpful as they launch their careers?
That's a great question, Suzanne, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. So, for emerging professionals and emerging leaders, the most important thing right now is you're going to have to deal with some of the confusion and conflict around hybrid workforce. Some employers are demanding everybody come back to work. However, with everyone having been remote for so long, people are not that willing to run back to the office. So most employees are looking for a hybrid workplace or work environment where they can work at home for some period of time and then go to the office for specific meetings or to reach out to colleagues or to just have a private meeting with the boss that's not on Zoom or some other
Mhm.
platform. But I think most of the younger people coming into the workforce are pretty technically savvy. So it shouldn't be much of a problem, but just be prepared because you may be in a situation where your boss insists that you're in the office, particularly if you're new. Now, some businesses are completely remote. In fact, I just rented out my office at the Lafayette Mill to a young professional who's in cybersecurity and he's doing a lot of cyber coding and he does not have to ever go to the office. His
Wow.
boss is on the West Coast, so he's going to work 11 to 7. And I think more flexible work hours is what today's workers are demanding, whether they're young or more experienced. Because it's kind of like that old song, once you show them Paris, you can't get them back on the farm again. That was after World War One when all the troops had gone through Paris. They weren't going to be happy working on the farm after they've been exposed to a beautiful city like Paris.
Mm.
And I think that's what's happening is that we always knew that working from home was a good option for a lot of people, but the pandemic forced it on us.
Right.
And so everybody had to work from home. And then
Hmm.
to try to demand to make people come back to the office, it's just not making a lot of people happy. And as you know, there's the great resignation that's going on right now, and a lot of HR professionals are very worried about that. So for younger folks just newly graduated, you might find a slot open because so many other people are just leaving and starting their own businesses or just quitting the workforce or going somewhere else where there's more flexible hours and more flexible working conditions. So that's the big thing that's coming out of the pandemic.
Wow, that's really fantastic. And obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think the time frame is? Like, when do you think things are going to settle out in terms of the Great Resignation?
I think that's really going to be up to the employers.
Mm.
It will most likely be more difficult for the older, more established companies.
Hmm.
However, I'm hearing that some really old line companies have completely eliminated some office space and they're farming out whole departments to home offices. So they don't even
Wow.
have an office to go back to.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll come back into for large meeting space for a certain meeting that has to be in person or what have you. So some security briefings have to be in person.
Sure.
But other than that, I think that the future of work is really going to be the hybrid model or 100% remote. Now, that does create another whole problem, and that is the essential workers that have to be there
Hmm.
every day. like bank tellers. When people
Right.
bring in their cash, they can't do that remotely, right? They have to bring in their cash and checks, put them in the bank. So the tellers have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And that does cause some resentment among the existing workforce that stayed and worked through the whole entire pandemic,
Yeah,
and
sure.
everybody else who was working from home.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is, my health's not as important as yours. So there is an adjustment being made, I think, by everybody in the new sort of work mode of the current time and what's to come.
Yeah, I love that. So we talked a little bit about the future, but I was wondering if you could give us some context in terms of your background and your past and what makes your crystal ball a little clearer than other people's.
Well, I've been in the workforce a really long time. I started out as a high school English teacher way back when. I taught high school for 10 years up in Syracuse, New York. And one of the students' parents worked at GE. They needed English teachers to work on their proposals over the summer. And I went back a couple summers and worked. Ended up getting hired at GE, stayed there about 4 years. And then from there, I got recruited to go to Sanders, which is up in Nashua, New Hampshire.
Mhm.
And I was there for about 2 or 3 years. Then I went back to Syracuse again, worked as a consultant, and I was there for a while and ended up in Morristown, New Jersey, and got a regular job down there in business development. And then my husband lost his job. He got laid off. His whole division got shut down. The
Wow.
whole plant just closed. So that was very stressful for a while. And then he got an offer from Raytheon, but they needed my position more than they needed his position. So I was the recruited spouse.
Oh, okay.
And I came into the company, I think, in 2001, and I left in 2014.
Congrats. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah, we were thinking about recruiting and we were talking about working remote. It made me think, all these tax benefits and policies and relocating
mm-hmm.
workers, how much money is spent on that? When you just
Absolutely.
take away the office space, like the amount that companies are spending in office space, but also this recruiting people, getting the best people. That's the big argument that I've been hearing from companies about why they want to have work remote is that they don't really need, you take a good worker and they're going to get the job done. And the likelihood that you're not forcing them to come into the office is actually going to increase their options and increase your options in terms of the talent pool, which I think is a really
Right.
interesting discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have not heard that one because I'm hearing mostly from old line companies and employees that work there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a lot of stress around what's being allowed and what's not being allowed and how much flexibility there is. I think that's a point very well taken to be able to sort through the very best employees by having sort of the whole world at your fingertips for hiring. Well, a lot of companies do that now anyway. In fact, I don't know if you realize this, but Boeing, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they outsourced a lot of their design to the
Hmm.
Russians
Oh, wow.
so that when the Boeing designers out in Seattle, I think, yeah, I don't think the headquarters is there anymore, but the manufacturing is still in Seattle. So when they go to bed at night, the Russians pick it up
Yeah.
and they work through the night.
Mm-hmm.
And they have input into, well, I don't think they have input into the design, but they get those CAD drawings done overnight. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's still going on, but that was one way to capitalize on what you're talking about. Medical profession does that with x-rays. You might have an x-ray technician in India reading your, or radiologist rather in India,
Sure.
reading your x-rays if you're in an accident and you come in the middle of the night. The folks in India, it's daytime for them at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
here. So that kind of has been happening already in some other fields. It did not hit, major companies in a big way until they had to rely on the pandemic. But you're correct about moving expenses, because we got 3 months living, we got closing costs. My husband got a signing bonus. I got a signing bonus. They also gave us an allowance for drapes and shades, and
Oh, wow.
we had a packing service and an unpacking service. So it is a big expense to move employees.
Yeah.
I think the thought process was, if they felt that they were poaching a really good person from another company, they felt that was a feather in their cap and worth it. And to be honest with you, some of these really big companies that are on the Fortune 500, they're worth billions. They're worth billions. So moving one senior employee, even if it costs $20,000, that's one executive's trip to Japan.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a
So
it's such a small
it's completely
expense.
in the noise. Yeah, it's
I think
completely
probably a
in the noise.
bigger impact is, let's say, Amazon picking, its second headquarters and what types of tax incentives. And it seems,
Oh.
Fidelity moved people to Texas from Rhode Island. There's a lot of, poaching and gambling and tax incentives and things like that that maybe won't be such a play. And towns and cities won't have to sacrifice so much
Mm-hmm.
just to try to get new workers and residents or get residents jobs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty interesting, I think. So, did you tell me that you wrote a book during, when the
I
pandemic first
wrote a
started
book.
happening?
Yes, I wrote a book. My business kind of dropped off a little bit during the pandemic, and I had a book sort of in the works. And my husband said to me, "Why don't you finish writing that book?"
That's awesome.
So I wrote a book about work. And I wrote a book about being a leader. And it's about, what are the ingredients to being a really good leader? I think we all know what we don't want to be. So this
Mm-hmm.
book says, okay, we know you don't want to be this, but be this, be that instead. And I
Right.
wanted to take it down this road because there's so many kind of Pollyannish types of books on leadership, like Good to Great and Born to Lead or Dare to Lead. And they're all so, I think like happy. They're also happy. And everybody knows that work isn't always happy. So I wrote this book to have some impact. And my subtitle is Transform Your Leadership Style from Command and Control to Transformational Visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big step. And when I was working at Raytheon, we did have a leader who was trying to do this. But I think he was fighting a losing battle because the tide was so strong in the other direction. The
Mm-hmm.
company wasn't structured for
Right.
transformational visionary, right? It was
Yeah.
structured for command and control. So to try to leapfrog over that was a big challenge. And there was some success, but I think there were also the same number of failures. And he was a great boss. I loved working for him. And I actually put his story in this book. I have a lot of work in here about women in the workforce and some of the things women don't do right.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear about female empowerment and women leadership and all of that kind of thing to make us feel better about ourselves, which isn't bad. But it turns out to be a lot of lip service when it comes down to the rubber meeting the road.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found in doing my research and also by working with female clients is that women are not supporting each other in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
That some of the worst bosses in the world are female bosses,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't treat the women employees well at all.
Right.
and they're not helping them along. In fact, they're setting traps for each
Wow.
other.
Yeah.
So that's a little scary. And I think that's a big lesson that we women have to learn, that we have to do what men do. There's a good old boys club for a reason. Um, the other thing aligned with that is women don't like to network that much, because I was surprised to read that women feel that it is selfish or even unethical or amoral to go to a networking event just to get information. So,
Hmm.
my point in the book is that, well, you're not going to get information, you're going to give information.
Yeah. Sure.
So, the question always is, how can I support you? What
Yes.
are your challenges? What are you facing every day in the workplace? And
Hmm.
that's not just with other women, it's with men too. But
Yeah.
I found that women are the least sincere when it comes to work.
Mm.
So, uh, the other thing I learned is that women in in my business anyway, the women that come for coaching are looking for something for nothing
Hmm.
unless they're really desperate.
Mm.
So what's
Interesting.
happening is that they're paying $50,000 a year for a private kindergarten for their kid, but they won't spend a couple $1,000s on themselves for coaching. They
Right.
don't see the value. And it's
Hmm.
kind of funny because when I say to them, what if your son needed $3,000 to fix his car or to get tutoring or for
Hmm.
a dorm fee? Oh, well, I'd get that money right away. But they don't believe that that money is well spent on themselves. And
That's
that's a
interesting.
really tough lesson to learn. What I found is that um, you can't really explain the value to people like that. They have to understand that it is a gift to themselves.
Sure.
And actually, I did have a client on the phone yesterday. I met her at a conference, and she just really wanted to have a conversation. And she said to me, and I said, well, how can I support you? Would you like to coach? And she said, I've been thinking about that. I thought I should really invest in myself. And I said, that's very good. I didn't want to
Hmm.
tell her that was like one of the first times in 7 years I've heard a
Yeah.
woman say that I really think it's time to invest in myself. So while we're
Sheesh.
talking about my book, I wanted to show which way am I going
Yeah, there
here?
you go. You
I,
got it.
okay, I wanted to show my field guide, and this is the companion book to this book.
Yep.
So this is about a 300-page book. I think it's 262 pages. This book's only 90 pages, and it's just for your own personal reflections. There's a lot of white
Hmm.
space in here, so
Mm.
you
Hmm.
get to write about things that you reflect on when you read the book. For instance, I have a chapter called "Corporate Soap Operas or Drama in the Workplace."
I love it.
And so the question is, how could drama be avoided in the case of Jackie? And Jackie's the main character in that story.
Nice.
And then some other questions. What impact on employee morale and well being does drama in the workplace have on employees?
Hmm.
And describe one area where you have witnessed or experienced undue drama in your organization. And so
Happens.
this is kind of a diary that people can put together. I have one client that bought the book and the workbook and is using it with her senior leadership team
Oh, cool.
for
Yeah.
training.
Well, I think it's a great tool, and we had talked about situational awareness and self awareness before. And I can
Right.
see where, you're reading about other people's experiences and then you're journaling or dialoguing so that you have a good understanding. And I just really appreciate this reality check because I think that that there's a lot of cheerleading, right, in conferences and things like that. But then
Exactly.
we need more gymnastics. You know what I mean? Like less rah rah and more. This is how you do the flip,
Yeah,
to be effective. And I
exactly.
just it's hard to do that because it's so individualized, right? It really depends on the leader and their strengths and the situation that they're in. So that's where I think that there is a value for coaching. But I just would love to talk about situational awareness and how, if you're an emerging professional, you can start building those leadership skills even before you are in a management position, because that's coming quickly, especially if you're, with ROI and you, we are aiming to give recent grads, emerging professionals, the skills that they need to be successful in a digital marketing career. And there's
Hmm.
fast growth and pace, so that you could quickly go from in the trenches to managing a team. And there's
Right.
a lot of, unless you've done that before, let's say in college, in one of my former interns was head of Greek life. There's not often a lot of opportunities to exercise leadership. So, what are some ways that they can do that? Exercise leadership skills in a non leadership role, let's say.
Well, that's an excellent point. I was actually just writing about that this past weekend. I have a digital column for Rhode Island News Today, which is run by Nancy Thomas. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a daily newspaper, and I'm the Monday business columnist. So I was just writing about how to step into leadership when you have no leadership experience. The best thing you can do is, just as you described, get into another type of role that offers you those leadership opportunities. So, for instance, and this is very good for people that get laid off also.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's say that you're part of a charitable fundraising campaign. So, let's say for Alzheimer's or for Heart Association or breast cancer, you can move into one of those leadership roles like finance director, membership coordinator, um, even volunteer point of contact.
Sure.
And all of that looks very, very good on a resume. So the question always is, well, how do I get experience if I don't have experience? Well, these volunteer organizations
Mm-hmm.
are crying out for people to help. And it's not that difficult once you join the organization to kind of grow into that role.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for everybody. So, like, if you are, if you've been in Girl Scouts, you can be a Girl Scout leader. Even as
Yeah.
a college student or a new graduate, you can be a Girl Scout leader. And that's got the word leader out of it, after it. And the Girl Scouts do a ton of leadership training. That's what they're all about.
Right.
All
That's
about
so great.
leadership.
But for not just
Um,
for the scouts, but for the leaders as well.
exactly. Well, it
Mm-hmm.
exactly. That's exactly what I meant, is that it's leadership training for those people in leadership roles, and then they train the girls to learn to take leadership roles. And that's one avenue, but there's so many other local charitable organizations that are really crying out for volunteers.
I know of a few. So
Yeah,
if anyone's
yeah,
interested, and a lot of them now are also location independent. You can do it
right.
remotely. So there's lots of opportunities, and I think it's a great opportunity to flex a new muscle, do something that is outside, especially if you're considering maybe a shift in role, gaining
Yeah,
some new skills just in the digital marketing realm. Let's say you do social media, well, you want to learn email marketing, or be able to integrate those campaigns. This would be a great opportunity to go to a smaller nonprofit and say, hey, I can help you with this, and build out
exactly.
that portfolio piece, which is so important. Yeah, I
Exactly.
love
There's
it.
there's a there's a great story about a CFO that lost his job. This was in a book called Fired After 50. So this works for any age level. And he was really down and out, down on his luck. So there was a huge library renovation project where the local municipality was investing millions and millions of dollars in their library. And he volunteered to be the CFO of the library project. When it went
Wow.
on for like a year, 18 months or something, it was a big, big project, millions and millions of dollars, like $20 million, something phenomenal like that. We did such a good job. The president of that entire overall project needed a CFO.
Hmm.
So when it was time to hire, he went right to the guy who stepped in as a volunteer. And
Sure.
it doesn't have to be the CFO level, it can be any level. But because they are so crying out for help, the volunteer organizations, even big brothers and big sisters, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
So anything, scouting, any kind of, you name the disease, jump on that. You name a fundraising for a church or a
Hmm.
library or a school or something.
Yeah, just something you
people
care
will
about.
People will get behind that. They'll support you, and the more work you do in the organization, the more leadership responsibility you're going to get. So that's the best advice that I have for anybody, emerging leader or experienced professional who wants to grow in their position, is volunteer, do things with around other people. It's also a great way to expand your network,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
now you know a guy. It's all about I know a guy.
Yeah.
And now you know somebody that you can reach back and help or get help from.
Yeah, definitely. And again, expanding your network is really important because that's how you get
Yes,
jobs. And there are ways
absolutely.
that you can, kind of stalk people to try to get to know them.
Yes,
I'm working on a little project like that myself, but it can get tricky. And it's a lot easier to, find a cause or, even joining a LinkedIn group that there's someone you're trying to connect with. This is a quick way to connect with people on LinkedIn is to join a group that they're part of. And then you join the group
absolutely.
and then you start commenting. But, that's a very high level, sort of easy trick. What you are describing is something that's much more strategic and meaningful and not only grows your network and it expands your portfolio, which, and those are two of the key elements of ROI in you, the digital marketing career builder, is we have our expert instructors and then you're doing actual real portfolio work, so that you
Right,
have that network and then we match you up with interviews at the end. And so it's all kit and caboodle, just as you're describing. Well,
right.
Mary, any last thoughts as we're wrapping up our half hour with you, which was so amazing and insightful?
Thank you. Well, my thoughts are really, I'm still thinking about the networking piece. What I've found, and this goes for big companies, small companies, and solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, is that the most important element in your career is developing your relationships with people, not just for the networking piece, but for establishing relationships that will last you a lifetime. So that you have mutual help back and forth between two of you, or between your organization and another organization. Another great way to do that is through your professional organizations. So for emerging leaders, join your professional organizations. For experienced professionals, if you're not in your professional organization, do that. That's how you learn and grow.
Yeah.
So that's my most, I would say, valuable piece of advice is get to know people, and get to know people in your field,
Hmm.
but have a broad spectrum of people in your Rolodex. Well, we don't have Rolodex anymore. In your
Your
contact
LinkedIn
list,
network, right?
in your LinkedIn network, that you can tap on the shoulder. And LinkedIn's been great. LinkedIn's been fantastic. I get people that comment on my posts a lot.
Hmm.
And then if I don't know them, I connect with them. So thank you for, commenting on my post. And I had, an amazing story. I had a woman that just called me from Electric Boat out of the blue and said, I'd really like to have lunch with you. I'd like to pick your brain, like to get to know you. Well, long story short, I'm going to be speaking in front of her group in the
Nice.
next month, about leadership. And that was a LinkedIn connection that just happened to work out. But one thing led to another, and I got to talk to the president of her professional organization, and they're in New London, they want me down there to do a presentation. So I'm very excited about that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's how the magic gets made, right? You make those connections, you follow through, you take initiative, and make sure that what you're presenting. Obviously, you're an experienced professional, but for someone who's not, bringing value and communicating what that value is, I think, is really important. And yeah, I really thank you so much for your
You're
time.
very
And these
welcome.
go by real quick because I know everyone is busy and doing 1,000 things, and whether you're on a run or mowing the lawn or doing dishes, would love to see you join our cohort, which will be starting again very soon. And you can learn more at roiinu.com. Thank you so much, Mary.
You're very welcome.